Hi, everyone, and welcome to Bleav in Big Ten. The college football semifinals are behind us, and we now know the players in the national championship. It's Ohio State to meet Notre Dame. I'm Tom Hannifan from State of State, a Penn State football show within the Bleav Podcast Network. He is suited and booted. He is Rhett Lewis, live from Los Angeles, and he represents the Big Ten Network and the NFL Network. And there's so much to get into in the wake of these semifinal games.
Yeah.
We got the games we were ultimately hoping for in terms of competitive ball. Everybody was really ticked off about the blowouts early on in this playoff. And then it's like, yeah, we got exactly what we were hoping for ultimately.
Yeah.
So we're going to sift through everything in terms of Ohio State versus Texas, and then Notre Dame versus Penn State, some important games to get to. But first, a little piece of business. This show is presented by BetOnline. Bleav in Big Ten is presented by BetOnline, and it continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting, whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor. BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion, with the largest selection of odds on everything from football to the NBA, college basketball to the NHL and UFC. BetOnline is the number one sports betting source. From touchdowns to three-pointers and hat tricks, BetOnline has you covered on every game, every play, and every win. Bleav in Big Ten is presented by BetOnline. The game starts here. Before we go any further, just want to send our condolences to everybody in Southern California dealing with the devastation of the wildfires. Rhett, your family was evacuated. You're in Los Angeles right now. So obviously it's an extremely difficult time. And, you know, us being able to do this show is a gift, and we're able to provide some entertainment and a distraction at a time that's just absolutely brutal.
Yeah. And, you know, my wife works in the news media for ABC, so she's been kind of on the front lines covering it since it all happened. You know, we've been evacuated from our home for about a little over a week now, and you know, grateful that it's still standing, but like so many, a little bit on edge still about what's to come. You know, here as we go forward through this next week, but just extremely grateful for the. And heroic is not an over exaggeration of the words to describe what firefighters from all over the world have done to protect Los Angeles as much as humanly possible in the face of these incredibly difficult conditions. And this, I mean, it's truly been a firestorm, and it's amazing the work and the courageousness of those firefighters. The work that they've done has been nothing short of brilliant, and so thankful for them, and thankful to continue to kind of keep this ball rolling, and hope that we can continue to do this for so many that are still, you know, wanting to get a reprieve from all that's going on.
Yes, we are a welcome distraction. So let's get to the football. Let's talk first Ohio State versus Texas. There were a lot of people thinking going into this one that Ohio State was going to pick up where they left off in the first round, in the quarterfinal, just steamrolling the competition. A lot of credit to Texas. I had a feeling that this defense from Texas was going to put up a fight. They're very physical, very talented, very, very quick. They gave Will Howard some trouble in this game. They were able to neutralize Jeremiah Smith. When you put 2 to 3 guys on Jeremiah Smith, I mean, I think that's kind of the answer, unfortunately. But the impressive thing about Ohio State was their resilience through this game, and that it did feel like at any point one team could just maybe make a jump here and there, but Texas just struggled to score points, struggled to chain together things offensively. That defense from Ohio State played so well. Jack Sawyer, obviously the star there to seal it at the end. What was your macro perspective of this game?
Well, I think, you know, when you look at it, it probably worked out game plan wise, you know, at least, you know, 75% of it the way Texas wanted it to. Like, if you tell them that Jeremiah Smith was going to catch one pass for 3 yards, you're like, we might have won that game.
Right.
Like, if that was what you were seeing, based off what we saw for the first 2 games of Ohio State's playoff run. And that's what makes Ohio State so dang good, is that, yes, you still have Carnell Tate, 7 for 87. You still have Emeka Egbuka, 5 for 51. Like, Travion Henderson goes, you know, for 75 on his only reception and goes for a touchdown. Shows you that game-breaking ability that he has. Quinshon Judkins is a force to be reckoned with. So all of that is there on the offensive side of the ball. And then the same thing that we have been talking about since the Tennessee game, and that came to a crescendo, I thought, against Oregon when they had 8 sacks on Dylan Gabriel, showed up again against Quinn Ewers in Texas. And that is the fact that Ohio State's defensive line probably didn't get the credit that deserved, even though it was still talked about, as a formidable group, but it probably still didn't get the credit that it has deserved for what they did, what they have now done through this entire playoff run. JT Tuimoloau out, Jack Sawyer, the guys on the interior, like that group have just been dominant, Tom. And ask the 3 quarterbacks that they've faced, from Nico to Dylan to now Quinn, like, holy smokes, like that is going to be tough for Riley Leonard and company to deal with. And we'll get to the preview portion of that a little bit later. But that's what this is why Ohio State was a national title favorite. Like, this is why we thought that they were going to be there, because of this incredible talent. And it's now just all coming together at the right time for them.
It's just amazing how far we've come. After the Michigan game, the sky was falling. I was probably the first person to say something like that. But at the same time, the way that they rebounded, it could have very easily been a situation in Columbus against Tennessee where they laid an egg, and all of a sudden the Volunteers are making their way through the playoff. But man, Ohio State circled the wagons. Ryan Day is saving his job one game at a time, really. I want to talk about the quarterback battle.
Yeah.
Quinn Ewers, he has his peaks and valleys, but admittedly, there was next to no running game for Texas for most of this season. We talked about some of the huge injuries they've had along the offensive line as the playoff has worn on, back half of the season, especially. So Texas kind of handcuffed in that respect. They have athletes, they have talent at wide receiver, but there's just only so much Quinn Ewers could do. Meanwhile, Will Howard had himself a solid game, but was slowed up by Texas. So watching how this game went down, stock up, stock down for Ewers and Howard, and especially Howard now moving forward into the national title against Notre Dame.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a good way to look at it. And I think you also have to take this in, take into consideration the baseline here, right? And for Quinn Ewers, the baseline is still really, really high. Now, I think there's obviously some question about where and what he's going to do here moving forward. But as of right now, I mean, like, after that game, like, just looking at it, in a vacuum, it's stock down. Like, he just was not, I don't think was the type of player that you needed to win a game like that, needed to be better. I think he has that in him. It just, we didn't see it last night. Now, sure, he had, a ton of faced 25 pressures in this game. And that is something that affects the way you play. How you deal with that determines in large part whether you're viewed as a lead or not. Like, that's ultimately what it comes down to. What can a quarterback do while under intense pressure, and how can he perform in that type of environment? And I think there's still a little lacking there. Not to say that, he's a complete, fish out of water at that point, but that was an onslaught. And he was dealing with, Jack Sawyer and Ty Hamilton and Tyleik Williams on the inside, and then JT on the other side. Like, it was coming at him from everywhere. And I think Jack Sawyer had the game of his life here, for Ohio State, obviously, with the way that it ended, and those two, being roommates.
What a story. What
poetic,
a story.
Right? I mean, you get to write it that way, script it that way. So it's stock down, I guess, in a mic under the microscope, in a vacuum, in that game for Quinn Ewers. But ultimately, I think stock is still pretty high on him if he does, in fact, decide to go the NFL route this year. I don't think it's first round high at this point, although that's where I felt like it was coming into the season. Maybe it is. Maybe he has a good run up to the draft. But then what? Like, if he decides not, then stock is way up in the transfer portal. Like,
rumors
you want to look at it,
there's a $6 million offer out there for him.
Yeah. I mean, like, I wouldn't be surprised if it goes higher. Like, that's the quarterbacks like that in college football aren't just hanging around being like, hey, what are you doing? You interested? Yeah. He's going to get the stock in that case is way up. So I think he's still in a good spot one way or another. And so is Texas. I feel like it's unlikely he stays at this point just because of the forward momentum of Arch Manning, but we'll see. As for Will Howard, I'd say, like, I don't know that I want to put this as a stock down situation. He was not as sharp as he was against Oregon. I think we could probably settle in on that. I think he still had a pretty productive day and was not under pressure in the way that Quinn Ewers was, but still did deal with a bunch. I mean, he took 2 sacks in this game, about 15 or so pressures against him. Obviously, he threw for almost 300 yards and was pretty efficient in terms of completion percentage. So I would kind of say, like, kind of flat from where he was, maybe a little bit of a dip from where he was against Oregon, but still overall, I'd say in the playoff, stock is up on Will Howard as he moves forward, to his final game as a collegiate player, final game for Ohio State. And his next game will come probably in Mobile, Alabama at the Senior Bowl. But beyond that, I think he's in pretty good shape as he moves forward.
And Will Howard, just to put things in perspective, 1 completion for 75 yards to Travion Henderson, watching Henderson do the work.
Yeah, you like to have that. Sure.
Yeah, his yardage is, hovering around 200, 24-33, a touchdown and interception. But I see what you're saying. And Texas made his life difficult. I think that's a better defense than Oregon. And I'm not saying Oregon had a bad defense by any means. That their gift is pass rushing. I think that's very obvious. Yeah. Texas was more well-rounded in that respect and gave Howard some trouble. And when the game plan is we've got to find Jeremiah Smith and he's taken away, you're inevitably going to have to make changes.
And I think, that's the other thing. Like, he was not, I think overall, like, I don't think he was flustered that, he targeted Jeremiah Smith 10 times and they only, completed one of them. I think it was like, and I applaud him for kept going back. You gotta, because one of those might hit, and that might be all you really need with a player like that, to get the ball in his hands in one favorable situation, and bam, the floodgates are open. So I applaud him for that. I applaud him for spreading the ball around in this game, knowing that it was going to be tough to find Jeremiah in this game. So again, overall, I still feel pretty solid about where Will Howard is as Ohio State heads to the national title game.
A talent like Jeremiah Smith, you have to force feed him within this offense. So Ohio State able to get past Texas in the other semifinal game, Penn State versus Notre Dame. This was a thriller. It was exactly the type of matchup that you and I expected it to be, a heavyweight, punch you in the jaw type of game, run the football, play great defense. And it came down to a last-minute field goal by Notre Dame to only get the win and get themselves to the national championship game. An incredible story between Marcus Freeman and James Franklin having that opportunity. But the way that this Notre Dame team persevered, 2 starting offensive linemen went down in this game. Riley Leonard got knocked out late in the second quarter, came back, and obviously had some heroics to lead them in the right direction. Jeremiah Love played his butt off with a brace on his knee, said he wasn't going to hurdle anybody, and he did anyway. This Notre Dame team was very impressive. And on the flip side, as somebody who's covered Penn State and watched every snap that Drew Allar and this team has had over the last few years, Drew Allar having one of the worst games of his life. But the rest of the sporting cast, unless you're a wide receiver for Penn State, played extremely well. The offensive line for Penn State, the running backs, Tyler Warren, tight ends, worked their butts off. The defense for Penn State, Abdul Carter with one arm made life extremely difficult for Riley Leonard and company. This just felt like a very even matchup, and that's exactly what we got. What did you see?
Yeah, I felt like this was a game that Penn State was in control of, though, in the first half, right? This is a game to me that felt like the run game was working. You were the more physically dominant team. I felt like in the first half, you go into the break, you're up 10-3. And then, I felt like there was maybe a little bit less of that physical dominance in that commitment to being a physically gritty and dominant team in the second half. And there was a lot more in Drew Allar's, on his right arm. And on that night, I don't think that was the path to victory. And I would have liked to have seen more of what we saw in the first half. So ultimately, to me, I thought the coaching kind of got away from them a little bit in the second half for Penn State, especially knowing. And I think, when you see what Drew Allar is capable of, I think, I think it was coming back from the second half, or maybe it was leaving the first half. And James Franklin was asked on the broadcast, what do you want to see? And he was talking about, we need to get Drew Allar going. And I was like, well, is that really? I mean, fine, I get it. But I think that's part of it. There is an intoxication with the talent that he has when he's on. The NFL throws, the type of throws are there. And so I think you're like, all right, well, if we get him going, we could put the nail in the coffin here, in that sort of thing. But sometimes that way, I think maybe you can overthink things a little bit and say well, all right, let's get back to let's take a step and say what's actually working for us right now. Mm-hmm. And what's working for us right now is Nick Singleton and Katron Allen and getting the run game going and keeping it going. And I just didn't think we saw enough of that in the second half. Did you feel the same way watching it?
I felt like Drew Aller, the moment was big for him. And I've seen that Drew Aller in 2023 against the likes of Michigan, against the likes of Ohio State, that deer in headlights Drew Aller. He returned. And Penn State, to your point, put him in too many situations where it was gotta have it pass attempts. When your wide receivers do absolutely nothing, not one reception, period, and cannot get separation, cannot get open, can't do anything meaningful in space, it's really hard to play the quarterback position. You've got the running game, but credit to Notre Dame, the way that they were able to slow up the outside run of Penn State in the second half. They made Penn State play in a phone booth, and then they made Drew Aller have to make difficult throw after difficult throw. Their pass rush, while I wouldn't put it in the category of Penn State or Ohio State, certainly created problems for Penn State. Drew Aller has got to take a long look at himself this offseason, figure out how to handle that stuff from the neck up. That's what it seemed to me, is the moment was big for him. And when every throw is, I have to make this happen, and it feels like, you're trying to score a touchdown every single play, that's not a recipe for success.
I'm going to derail this show here with this next comment/question. But what happens if in a couple of days, when the dust on this settles, Drew Aller says, you know what? I'm going to be a top 10 pick in the NFL, and I'm going to go, because there are quarterback desperate teams in the NFL right now, as we've seen the draft order come into focus. Cleveland Browns sitting there at number 2, Tennessee Titans sitting there at number 1, Raiders not far behind, and there is not a wealth of first-round worthy quarterbacks. And say what you want about Drew Aller, but he is first-round worthy in terms of talent. Now, can you coach up the decision-making? Can you coach up the processing? What happens to Penn State now if that's the case and Bo Perbula is already on his way to Missouri?
I don't think Drew will go in the NFL draft this year. I think he is committed to developing. And I think it was a false narrative put out there by the media after the Boise State game of like, oh, he might go. It was like, yeah, like he played SMU and Boise State. And I think we understand what those teams are. I'm not looking down my nose at him by any means. Drew Aller looks like he had a lot of maturing to do in this game. And when I saw him play for most of this season, you see the peaks, and they are physical. It's all from the neck up, as I just said. It's everything that he's got to do between the ears to handle that pressure, process, be able to make better decisions with football. Because right now, Penn State fans will look at him and say, this is another Christian Hackenberg. All of the physical gifts, but from the neck up, it's not there yet. It can be there. Another year at Penn State, I think he can absolutely put it together. If he was to make a decision like that, where he was going to go for the money, I'd be stunned, because that's everything that goes against what I have come to understand about Drew Aller as someone who covers the team regularly.
Yes, but what if the NFL wants him out? Like, what if the NFL wants him in this draft? There are enough teams that have made it clear that they want him in this class because he's going to go.
I understand your point. I think Carson Beck just gave us a great piece of information. Everybody thought Carson Beck was going to be a top 10 pick. He, what is he, Tommy John?
Sure.
His UCL.
He's at let's just call it elbow surgery.
Right.
Yeah.
He's going to have elbow surgery on his throwing arm. Now, there was a comparison saying that Will Levis is making a base salary of $950,000. Nothing bad by any means. And he's in the state of Tennessee, so no state income tax. Great for you, bud. Great. Carson Beck is allegedly going to Miami now for $4 million to rehab,
tax.
And his girlfriend's there. So, like, great situation where he can rehab, maybe get himself some significant playing time next year if he's able to start the beginning of the season. Not sure the extent of the injury. There is more to be gained financially right now for college quarterbacks that are
not if you're the number 2 pick, Tom. Not if you're the number 2 pick.
Do you think Drew Aller inspired that much confidence after that game that someone's going to take him number 2? Because you got to coach him up. You got to lead him by the nose now.
I think, Tom, that there is a desperation right now to get quarterbacks in the NFL. And I think that if you tell them that they're going to make a fully guaranteed 4+ with a 5-year option being a first-round pick, I think that's going to be really hard to turn down.
Money talks.
I'm just food for thought. Food for thought. Now here, okay, I'll bring us back. Okay,
Cool.
I'll bring us back here for a second, because we do know that Abdul Carter is going to be a very high draft pick.
Yes.
Because what he showed you in this game was the talent and the toughness, right? And when you got that combination, there is nothing the NFL won't do to get a player at that premier position on their team. And so that's a top 10 pick right there, maybe a top 5 pick when it's all said and done here. But that dude was incredible in this game. And my hat is off to him, because I know, there's a lot that he was dealing with there with the injury. And we'll probably learn a little bit more about it as it goes on. But to be out there and to impact the game in that way against a quarterback who is no easy takedown, right? And
Slippery.
Penn State, man, and I think Dennis Sutton made himself a lot of money in this game too, who has kind of been that under the radar other guy, right? But this Penn State defense did their part in this game. And I know late kind of let some big plays go, but man, that was fun to watch that front group dominate.
As we wrap up here, we'll do a full preview of Ohio State versus Notre Dame later on this week here on Bleav in Big Ten. But just quickly looking at this matchup, I feel like the spread that we're getting from our friends at Bet Online right now, which is -8.5 in favor of the Buckeyes at the time of us recording this, that feels a little wide. This feels like it's going to be a knockdown drag out, very similar to what we saw with Penn State and Notre Dame. I feel like Ohio State's going to be able to score, but I think a lot of people thought that Ohio State was just going to smoke Texas, and Texas's defense played very, very well in that game. Notre Dame's defense showed adaptability that I think they provide a greater challenge defensively for Ohio State. But looking at this from that 30,000-foot view, how do you feel about Ohio State versus Notre Dame at first blush?
I think it's a 2-score game. I don't think it's going to be that. I don't think it's going to be that close. I look at Notre Dame's offensive line now being down a couple of starters. I think this defensive front from Ohio State is as dominant, if not more, than what, at least over these last couple of weeks, than what we saw from Penn State against Notre Dame this last game. So I think, again, this will come down to Ohio State's front, wreaking havoc on Riley Leonard all day long. I think they can slow down the run. But ultimately, I don't think that Notre Dame's going to make enough plays offensively to really have this thing. But now, look, this is a game where, look, Notre Dame plays a ton of man coverage, so these Ohio State receivers can earn that money in this game, right? Earn that money. You get open for Will Howard in this game. I think it's a 2-score Ohio State victory.
Notre Dame's going to have to come up with the same gutsy effort that they put out against Penn State defensively. Riley Leonard's going to have to figure out how to be a little bit more efficient throwing the football. That's been an issue for them all season long, not saying that he can't do it. The thing that's so impressive about Riley Leonard is that he's going to go down as one of the great college quarterbacks. And that I think of, I wouldn't necessarily call him a Tim Tebow, but you remember how Tim Tebow made all those timely plays. He just made the plays when you had to have them. That's what Riley Leonard does. That's what this offense has been able to do. The wide receivers, the tight ends for Notre Dame were able to step up against Penn State, which was impressive. Can they do that same thing? And also, how bad are the injuries to the offensive line for Notre Dame up against Ohio State's defensive line? We are going to dive into all of that later on this week here in Bleav in Big Ten. I'm Tom Hannifan from State of State, a Penn State football show. He is Rhett Lewis from the Big Ten Network and NFL Network. We'll catch you next time on Bleav in Big Ten.